Brendan and Damien were brought up by a loving and devout Catholic couple in Richmond, Melbourne. It was an idyllic childhood. Roy and Bet Watkins adopted Damien in 1959 and Brendan in 1961. Brendan started to realise his adoption was unorthodox when he turned 29 and decided to find out about his biological parents.
I was born in a private hospital, which is really unusual. People weren't born in private hospitals. Who paid for it?
By 1990, Brendan and his partner Kate were keen to have children, so they wanted to know about his genetic history. The first step was to obtain his original birth certificate. It was here at the Catholic Family Welfare Bureau in Melbourne that Brendan had his first meeting with a social worker to find out the names of his biological parents. It was not what he expected.
I was hoping that the birth certificate would have both parents' names. It just had my mother's. I went along expecting the stereotypical solution to those early questions, that it was a young girl, 16, 17, 18, got pregnant, Catholic, adopted into the Catholic community, but it wasn't. It was different. My mother was 27. That was much older than any other stories I'd read about. She was from South Australia, another state.
Brendan asked the social worker to contact his biological mother, something she wasn't keen to do.
She was foreboding. She was quite fierce and unsentimental, and these notions of feeling ungrateful was sort of reinforced by her.
A few weeks later, the social worker called Brendan.
And she said she'd spoken to my mother, and I was optimistic, thinking that's fabulous. When do we meet? When do we get together? Was she happy to hear from me? And it was the opposite. And I was told that I wouldn't meet my mother, I wouldn't talk to her, it would never happen, and very directly told to go home and forget about her forever. It's the most wounding, impactful trauma of my life. I've only just realised that.
But a year later, Brendan did eventually find his mother Maggie, not her real name. Her name was in the phone book. He enlisted Kate, his partner, to call one of her relatives.
And Kate rang and said, "Are you sitting down? I found your mother. She's a nun." But it went some way to explain why she didn't want contact, why we'd never meet, why we'd never talk. And from that day on, I pictured my mother in a nun's habit, in a convent, walking silently through churches, and had that image for years and years and years. And it gave me some peace.
Dejected, each year he marks his calendar to remind himself to check the death notices to see if his biological mother Maggie is still alive. Eventually Maggie allowed contact through letters and a short visit. But still Brendan did not have a name for his biological father.
What followed was essentially 30 years of different stories. My father was dead, or she didn't know what happened to my father. And after 15, 18 years of first making contact, she said to me, "I told you your father's name." And she gave me a name, Paul Hayes. And so the first thing I did was go and hire a private detective.
The private detective delivered his report. The name is invented.
And I wrote back to my mother and I told her that, and she wrote back and said, "Well, I was dumped and so were you." And she was right. It was over, the chase was over. And so around 2010 I raised the white flag and gave up. It was over, there was no way I could find my father.
5 years later, Brendan decided to send his DNA sample to ancestry.com.au. One day an email arrived that showed Sydney was the location of many of his biological relatives, with 4 men as likely candidates for his father.
And the fourth was quickly discounted because he was a lot older than my mother. He was 30 years older. and we ruled him out because he was a Catholic priest, so it couldn't be a Catholic priest, could it?
But incredibly, Maggie confirmed that his father was indeed a priest. Father Vincent Shield had moved her from South Australia to his brother's home in another state when she was 18 years old. Maggie entered a convent soon after Brendan was born.
She did 25 years service as a nun to pay her debt, and pretty much a year or so after she left the convent, I first made contact. She was living with my father. They were living under the same roof. But of course, she was living with a priest.
In 2020, Brendan came here to MacKillop Family Services to retrieve his adoption file, but no records could be found. The archivist told him this was very unusual. He had to appeal to the Victorian Department of Justice. You've got your file, which is here. What was missing from it?
It was still very incomplete. So my birth records, hospital records were gone. My baptism certificate, I still don't know if I was ever baptised. A lot of documentation was gone. But what really hurt was to find the interview notes of my birth mother. I found that she was traumatised by my adoption, and that's the opposite of what I was told at the time. I was told she was a stern, determined woman and that she prayed for me every day and that there'd be no contact.
So for years you thought your mother didn't want to see you and she was cold-hearted. That's cruel, isn't it?
It is cruel, it's immoral, and I can't believe that the church did it.
Charlotte Smith is the CEO of Vanish, the peak advocacy body for adopted persons in Victoria.
This has been an ongoing theme within this space. Records have been known to fall off the back of a truck or be destroyed in fires. We have quite a few adoptees over the years who have found no paper trail, and it's so important for them to get recognition and acknowledgement for the fact that these practices went on. It's really important to shine a light on them.
For the last 3 years, Brendan has been writing a book about his adoption journey. He's about to make another trip to South Australia to find out more about his priest father, Vincent Shield, and what went on in that vast, remote diocese. Morning breaks over the Spencer Gulf at Port Augusta in South Australia. It's here at this former Catholic high school that Maggie first met Father Shield. Brendan has asked his cousin Bill to come on the road trip with him.
Hey Bill, how are you?
Brendan, great to see you.
So this is where you grew up, the family home, yeah?
Just over here, the White House there. I spent a lot of my childhood there until I left to move away.
Yeah. My mother, Maggie, was here. My recollection in the letters that he wrote, he was instructed to come to Port Augusta to exert his great renowned zeal to get to know the young people of Port Augusta. She was 14 or 15. He was 30 years older. And when my mother turned 18, he arranged for her to go and live with the Shields.
I knew, and I'd been told that they were, how can I put it, she was caring for him when he got older. Yeah. So that was my understanding of the arrangement. But housekeeper extraordinaire.
Shorthand,
yeah.
Father Vincent Shield had an adventurous life. After training in Ireland, he first came to South Australia in 1943. His diocese during the 40s, 50s, 60s and 70s was a vast area from inland desert to coastal towns.
A strange man that was Father Vin Shield, my father, a man that I'll never know. Somebody that died in 1993 at 90 years of age. I've got these amazing photos of him Just before he died, they celebrated his 50th anniversary in the church.
Brendan and Bill drive through the Flinders Ranges, stopping on the way to look at some of the old churches. They are headed to Whyalla on the Eyre Peninsula to find out about another secret.
Well, Brendan, I brought you to the Whyalla Hospital. This is where my Uncle Terry started his life. Born here to a young girl, and he was picked up, I believe, from the story I've been told, and flown to Sydney and to Father Vin's family over there to be, I guess, unofficially adopted.
Yeah, Terry was here for 10 days and taken away, and Father Vin, as I think a lot of the priests did in those days, certainly I've had many stories of it, arranging these adoptions, sometimes with paperwork, sometimes without. It all became a bit foggy.
Baby Terry, that was left at Whyalla Hospital and adopted into Father Shiel's family in Sydney, is now 72 years old and lives in Perth. Terry and Bill Shiel grew up together in Sydney at the priest's brother's house.
Hi Terry, how are you?
Billy, how you doing? Brendan, how are you?
Good day, Terry.
It took Terry many years to find and meet his biological mother. She was a 16-year-old girl living on a pastoral station near Whyalla when she fell pregnant to a local worker.
She was brought down to Whyalla to give birth to me, and that was as much as I've ever been able to find out, until I met yourself, of course, and I started thinking, well, is there more to this story than what I've been told?
So the local doctor rang Vin and said, I've got a child here.
Oh, really? I didn't know that, Brendan. I didn't know that was part of it.
Yeah, certainly what I've been told. That
I didn't know much about the adoption, how it happened or anything like that.
Yeah. And my father, Father Vin, arranged for your adoption and your transporting to Bill Shiel over in Sydney.
And it was a big family already, Terry, wasn't it?
It was. I tried to understand why he would have got his brother to adopt me when they'd already had 9 kids of their own, and Mum and Dad weren't well. They'd been, Mum particularly, she'd been ill for quite some time prior to that. Dad had a lot of heart problems later in life. When I say later, he was only 66 when he passed away. But he had a heart attack prior, about a week before, and he was still recovering from that. And I was sitting down reading the Sunday paper, and he just put the paper down and he just said to me, he said, Terry, he said, just remember you're my son and you always will be.
Father Shiel swore his entire family to secrecy, so Terry only found out he was adopted in his 30s when he applied for his birth certificate.
He was living up the Blue Mountains at the time. I went up there and I said to him, I said, I found out I've adopted. I said, can you help me out? I'm trying to track down my birth mother. And he sort of shook his head and said, oh, look, he said, it's so long ago. He said, they're probably all dead anyway. That was his answer.
But Terry's biological mother wasn't dead. Father Shiel had told a lie.
Yeah, I think it's something that should have been brought out in the open a long, long time ago, and why they just keep covering things up and not admitting to what went on, I don't know. I mean, what are they afraid of? Because everybody has a right to know where they come from, I think, and what their background is.
Corn, now a well-preserved tourist town, was Father Vincent Shiel's last parish before he moved to another state to live with Maggie.
I think he saw himself as a real lovable rogue.
Yeah.
Although my wife didn't like him. I always wanted him to marry us, and we had quite a chat, and said, Bill, said, just a word of warning. He said, don't let her go on the pill. He said, when they go on the pill, they tend to wander.
Bill, you knew Father Vin. It seems from Brendan's story he had a huge sense of entitlement as a priest, that he could tell people what to do, he could control people.
I think it's an abuse of power. and he was certainly controlling of me in several ways, and I resented it.
At the end of the day is that, taken to the extreme extension of the authority they had, it's a spiritual abuse. The priests are the hands and feet of God on earth. It's very hard to say no to a priest, and particularly for somebody like Vin. He was in the second largest diocese on planet Earth, apparently. They can do whatever they like. It's unchecked. The control is unquestioned.
How do you feel about the fact that your mother was denied even talking about the fact she'd had a child? And Vin said to her, "You're not allowed to tell anyone about you." How do you sit with that?
I think the greatest cost is on controlling the mothers, the women within the Catholic faith, and it denies them equality, and it denies them a voice, and it then extends through their offspring. They're kept from their tribe.
Brendan's mother's story is not unique. Her journey has been lived by thousands of women around the world. Michelle, not her real name, came from a dysfunctional family where violence was the norm. She first met a priest as she was finishing her last year of school in 1967. He was 12 years older than her.
He paid me very special attention and showed that kind of interest in me that a father would do, but my father didn't. And I was very taken with that kind of attention.
The priest told her to keep their sexual activity a secret.
I knew that it was not supposed to be happening because he was a priest, but he reassured me that if people loved each other, then that was all right, which was quite confusing because I had been taught otherwise. But the other thing was that he was the person in my life who had the most authority.
Michelle was 18 when she fell pregnant. The priest asked her to come to a meeting with 2 other priests. She was shocked by what happened next.
One of them said to me that he had a mate in the city who did abortions and had actually performed an abortion for a girlfriend of his. I was shocked, first of all. I was absolutely shocked. I was very ignorant about abortion. This was in the 60s, and all I knew about it was I knew that it was illegal. I knew that it was dangerous. So it was just a terrifying time altogether. And the offer of abortion was a part of that atmosphere of terror.
Later, one of the priests sexually assaulted her.
He drove me to the motel and he kissed me in the car and blamed me and said that I had kissed him. But I knew I hadn't, but I was in a state of shock and confusion. He was a priest who had a lot of authority. He had quite a high position in the church, and he followed me to my motel room and refused to leave, and he raped me.
Michelle refused to have an abortion and also decided to keep her baby, despite the immense pressure to adopt it.
What had to happen at all costs was that his reputation and identity as the father of my child were protected, and the church was protected. Those were the paramount considerations.
In Frankfurt, Germany, Dr. Doris Riesinger has finished a major research project on reproductive abuse by priests. A former nun, now a senior academic at the Goethe University.
I don't know how many pages, thousands of pages I looked at. All kinds of documents, from survivors' accounts to court documents to newspaper articles to grand jury reports. So I found the first abortion case involving a 13-year-old girl. And I found cases with girls even younger than that, 11-year-olds who had become pregnant as a result of sexual abuse by a priest. Something that typically happened was that they would be put under pressure to abort, and I was amazed at how many victims did not want to abort, actually. They did not want to give in to this pressure, they wanted the baby.
Are these cases you're talking about all many, many decades ago, or are we talking that this is happening now or in modern history?
Many of the victims that I have looked at, they're my age. So even if they have happened to them as children or teenagers, it's not long ago. And I actually think we can assume that this is still going on because none of the contributing factors has been erased. The clerical power of priests, mandatory celibacy that often works as a perfect excuse and cover for reproductive abuse, all of that is still fully in place. And no major research has gone into reproductive abuse. So there is still lots to be done.
And Richard Sipe, the academic's done his own work saying only 50% of priests are actually celibate. So are we talking hundreds of children around the world, thousands?
No, we are definitely talking hundreds of thousands of children affected by reproductive abuse.
At the heart of the issue for Dr. Riesinger is mandatory celibacy.
It's obvious that this is a very dangerous topic for the Catholic Church because it puts so much into question that is essential for the functioning of the power structure of the Catholic Church.
To me, it says so much about the misogyny of the Catholic Church, the institution. It's a male-centric institution that doesn't recognise the rights of women.
Brendan has returned to Melbourne to meet another child of a priest, Linda Kelly Lawless. Linda's father, the priest Father Joe Kelly, used to come to this chapel to give mass to the unwed mothers next door who were waiting to have their babies and adopt them out.
He would help support them through the system. And while he was doing this, though, my father was actually having an affair with my mother. He was moved from here. I believe he was sent to Healesville because of the affair with my mother.
Yeah, again, it's all this pattern, isn't it? Church pattern. Something goes wrong, the priest is moved on and the women are left holding the baby literally.
Literally.
Linda's mother did not go ahead with her adoption.
My paperwork was never finished. And I just seemed to vanish from this hospital. All my paperwork has baby for adoption, false names. I can't find any baptism records.
Linda Kelly Lawless is seeking official recognition from the Catholic Church that she is the daughter of Father Joseph Kelly. Linda's mother never told her who her father was, but a friend of her mother's did. Over the last 5 years, Linda has presented Archbishop Comensoli with a statement from this friend, a report from a genealogist, and witness statements from her aunts.
I have presented the Archbishop with an affidavit from my aunt, another affidavit from another aunt, another affidavit from another aunt, a stat declaration from a friend of my mother's, and I also sent in a DNA report that was done by for MyHeritage and Ancestry, and the findings were that there was only one person who could be my father, and that was Father Joseph Kelly. I had legal DNA testing with Parabon in America, and a cousin from my grandfather's side and a cousin from my grandmother's side stepped forward. We did legal DNA testing, and the results came back that I was 99% related to both of them and my father. He's an only child. And I presented that to the Archbishop of Melbourne.
Parabon DNA testing is used by the FBI in the US and by Queensland Police in criminal and missing persons cases. But Archbishop Comensoli wrote back to Linda saying, whilst he believed her, formal recognition would need to come from the state, not the church, and that exhumation may be the only way to achieve this.
Although I do not have the authority to request an exhumation of Father Joseph Kelly, if it is to be sought, it would need to come from you. I would be prepared to support such an application from yourself.
I have to exhume him to prove to him that he is my father. Scientific DNA evidence apparently isn't enough.
Have you asked for legal compensation?
No, I haven't. I've asked for a letter of recognition that they acknowledge that he is my father. I asked for some support to sort out my birth certificate, which they have helped me with. I asked for an apology for my mother.
In a statement to Compass, Archbishop Comensoli states,
The Archdiocese of Melbourne has supported Linda and have offered financial support. There is no denying the historical fact that priests have fathered children. The Church now steps forward in finding ways to acknowledge children who have priests as their father. I cannot state categorically that Father Kelly is her biological father. There is simply not the level of information to do so at this point in time. Regardless of the above, I have shared with Linda in writing that I believe that Father Kelly is her biological father.
Hi Susie, how are you?
good, hi Linda. So this is the headstone you had
Yes.
made for your father.
Yes, it is.
The parish priest from this local area and the private Catholic cemetery, they had no problem with you putting your name.
No, none at all.
Why is it important for you, for Archbishop Comensoli to apologise and to recognise you're the daughter of Father Joseph William Kelly?
It's the right thing to do. It's acknowledging that I existed and I'm not hidden anymore, and I don't think it's too much to ask.
The Peak Adoption Advocacy Group in Victoria says it's time for a public and independent inquiry.
It's clearly the case that he's the father, so there should be some power to force the Church to accept that responsibility. It would be beneficial for the victims and survivors of these practices if there were formal inquiry into what happened and how many children are actually children of priests, and to provide them with some sort of justice.
Thanks to DNA and the tenacity of people like Brendan and Linda Kelly-Lawless, the hidden children of priests are finally being heard. But Brendan wants a full federal inquiry to bring justice and compensation to these children and their silenced mothers.
The Church has made the children of priests. They have an obligation. They're the wealthiest institution on planet Earth. They can afford it. They need to fund support to children of priests.